This is Join Us in France, episode 234. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and I'm glad to be with you today. On today's episode, 20 tips for visiting Paris with teens. Marc Genda is a really astute traveler who has some experience with France and has great suggestions for Paris that apply not just to people who visit the city with their teens, but to anyone, really. A couple of things that we talk about in this episode that haven't come up much before are using scooters in Paris and taking the TGV to Luxembourg. And as always, we keep it real. Show notes and photos for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/234. 234. Join Us in France is brought to you by Patreon supporters and my soon-to-be launched empire of GPS-aware audio tours. I'm laughing because I have enough ideas to create an empire. Now, it's about finding the time to write all of them, but I'm making progress. If you want to be updated, join the email list by going on any page on joinusinfrance.com and looking for the green button that says extras. That would be email extras. Bonjour, Marc, and welcome to Join Us in France.
Bonjour, Annie. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to have you. Today, we are going to discuss your recent trip to Paris with your teenagers. And
Yes.
You sent me a lovely list of 20 tips for visiting Paris with teens. And that is a question that people ask all the time, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, traveling with teens is an adventure, whether they're yours or I've traveled with students a lot, but traveling with teens is always filled with the unexpected.
That's right. So when were you in Paris?
We were in Paris the first week of April. We arrived on March 29th and were there until April 6th.
And that's 2019.
Yes, that's correct.
Cool. And why did you pick Paris? Is this a place you've visited many times, or?
Yeah, I've been to Paris many times. My wife lived in Paris when she was young.
Oh.
So it's a place that the two of us hold a lot of memories in, and we sort of felt like to show kids a little something about traveling in urban spaces and traveling in European urban spaces. There's no better place to get your feet wet than Paris.
Yeah, that's a good point. London is pretty good too.
Yeah.
All right. So tell us a little bit about your kids. How old are they?
So we have a 13-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl. The 16-year-old is ready to explore the world and is fearless about going anywhere. Uh-huh. The 13-year-old, I'd say the 13-year-old is also relatively fearless, but maybe is not as excited about travel as his sister is.
I see. So you had to motivate him a little more.
Yeah. You have to, like traveling with any teenagers, I think you have to figure out what's going to be attractive and interesting to them and realize that it's their trip and not yours in a sense.
That's true. There's got to be something in it for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So tell us, you sent me this nice list. Let's take it down from number 1 and all the way down.
Yeah. So number 1, I got to say we were stunned with how easy it was to get into virtually every museum. We had museum passes for my wife and I, and of course the kids are able to get into so many of the museums free. Mm-hmm. And, we knew that spring was going to be better than summertime. I've been to Paris many times in the summer and the lines are insane everywhere.
Yeah.
But, we walked right into the Louvre without any line whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The same at the Musée d'Orsay.
Oh, wow.
It was incredible. Now, some of that was timing. On Wednesday evening, the Louvre is open late, and we didn't walk in until about 3:30. And everyone, that was the lull between the evening visitors and the morning visitors.
Ah, okay.
The same thing with the Musée d'Orsay on Thursdays. They're open late, and we arrived at about the same time, 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Right.
And there was no line.
Wow, that's surprising for Orsay. There's usually a line at Orsay.
Yeah, and I was expecting at least a little bit of line everywhere. Of course, having the museum passes gave us a different way to enter, and that proved absolutely invaluable for us.
Right, so I'm assuming you knew that you didn't need a museum pass for your kids, right?
Right.
Okay.
So we just had a museum pass for my wife and I, and spent almost no money at all for the kids to enter almost anything.
Right. So this is important for me to explain. The museum pass is different from the Paris pass. The museum pass is a good deal. The Paris pass is a ripoff.
Right.
And the museum pass gives you access to all the national and city museums in Paris, which is most of them, but it does not give you access to the Eiffel Tower. There's a few private museums, not the Natural History Museum and places like that, because they are separate, but most museums are included. And if you're going to get those for the adults, up until the age of 18, you don't need it. And I recommend people bring ID because typically an American 14-year-old might look like an adult to a French person because they're so much taller and more mature, I think. They mature faster, American kids. I don't know why. And
our
so
16-year-old, I'm sorry, our 16-year-old definitely could pass for over 18. And the thing that we did with every line is my wife and I went first, and we acted like we knew what we were doing, and nobody stopped us at all.
That's
However,
good.
we did have photocopies of the passports just in case anyone wanted to check an ID.
Excellent. So another point I want to make about that is don't bring your actual passport don't have it in your pockets or in your bag when you're walking around Paris, because if it gets stolen or if you lose it, that's a huge deal to replace. But take a photocopy, or maybe next time you renew your passport, ask for a passport card, because that looks like an official ID, but it's good for nothing other than, proving your age and whatever.
Right.
So that would be a good way to do it.
Great. I should say I traveled. I'm a history teacher, and I traveled with teenagers many times, my own students. And one time we did have a lost passport in Paris, and that took a few hours to fix at the embassy. And it's an inconvenience.
It is.
It wasn't hard, but that's time you're spending in line at the embassy instead of seeing a great city.
Correct. Yeah, not my idea of a good time.
No, not at all. Not at all. So the second thing on the list is to do the stairs up and down the Eiffel Tower. You can go as high as the second floor. And to me, having been up to the third floor many times, the view at the second floor is really better because you can see more. You can sort of pick out details. From the third floor, you're awfully high.
Yeah.
And doing the stairs just gives you an opportunity to see this really great building from such a different perspective. Mm-hmm. The elevator is certainly an experience, but being on the stairs and being right in the structure is really cool. And, there's something to be said for exhausting teenagers. There's a lot of energy there, and going up those 600 and something stairs is something to do. Yeah. Yeah. And also with kids and Instagramming now, there's so many cool pictures you can get from within the building where, people aren't exactly sure where you are, but it's exciting and it's not that hard. I personally find coming down the stairs harder than going up the stairs. But it's a cool way to do it, and it's not something everyone does. And it also has almost no line.
Right.
We waited in line at the Eiffel Tower on, it was the Saturday. It was the last weekend in March. It was the Saturday they were celebrating the 180th birthday of the Eiffel Tower. So, and it was a gorgeous day. It had all the ingredients for a long line, but to do the stairs, we waited in line for maybe 5 minutes. Right,
because it's a separate entrance. It's a separate ticket line. So, and it's cheaper too. Do you remember how much you paid?
I want to say it was maybe €10. pretty hard to complain about that.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah. The third thing on my list is to point out is sometimes I think people get anxious about visiting Paris and all that they've heard about Parisians being rude. And I've got to say we had none of that experience whatsoever.
Good.
The kids, every time we walked into any store or restaurant, the kids knew to make sure to say bonjour and au revoir when we left. And they were wonderfully polite. And the Parisians were engaging. And we had wonderful conversations and just great experiences, and none of that stereotypical gruffness that I think the Parisians get credited for. We had a wonderful time, and they were great.
I think it's when people don't know the basics of just saying bonjour and au revoir, especially bonjour. French people, for some reason, are really prickly about that. And so if you know that trick, then they're going to think, oh, this visitor is actually friendly. And they'll be friendly back,
Yeah.
Very good point.
The fourth thing actually relates to a sort of a day trip, a one-night trip. We headed to Luxembourg for one night. We left on a Monday morning and came back Tuesday night. We went to Luxembourg because, and this is a whole other podcast probably, my wife and I actually met when we were in middle school. We were both attending the American school in Luxembourg then, and we lost touch for years and reconnected as adults.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And, it's a movie.
Yeah.
So we took the TGV from Gare de l'Est to Luxembourg, and that was a wonderful experience. Getting on the train was easy. We reserved our tickets online before we left. It was incredibly cheap. And had a wonderful time. I think traveling by train in Europe is something everyone should do. And it was wonderful to get out of the hustle and bustle and the frenetic pace of Paris and just go to, Luxembourg is busy in its own way, but it's nothing like Paris.
Right. Now, I have to say, again, you mentioned that it was very nice and pretty cheap. It's not cheap every day. So, the earlier you buy your ticket, and by early, I mean, I think 8 weeks, maybe 10 weeks is the earliest you can buy your tickets. But if you do it that far in advance, you'll get a really good price. The longer you wait, the more you'll pay, at least for the TGV, for the fast
And
train.
that's exactly what I had observed, that if you buy the tickets right when they're available, they're incredibly reasonable. If you wait until the week before, they're much, much more expensive. You're better off just taking a slower train and enjoying the view.
Right. And if it's around a holiday or a French school vacation or something like that, then prices will be higher because the prices of trains do go up and down.
Right.
Yeah.
The fifth point, this was my first time using an Airbnb in Paris, and I don't think I ever want to do it any other way again. Having an Airbnb was incredible. To be there for, I guess we were there for 9 nights, to have the freedom of our own living room and kitchen, and each of the kids to have their own space. With teenagers particularly, having each of them with their own space to just get away for a little bit was incredible. And then we didn't have the pressure of having to get up and get out in the morning before any kind of housekeeping came in.
True.
We just had that freedom of being truly in the city, I think. And then, our place was in the first arrondissement, right around the corner from Saint-Eustache and Les Halles, and that location was
very
absolutely
busy.
Phenomenal. Right,
it's very busy, but it's a really central location.
Yeah, we were able to walk. We could walk to the Louvre, we could walk to Notre Dame. We had Rue Montorgueil right around the corner.
Yeah.
It was spectacular.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think with teenagers especially, it's nice because if you got 3 hotel rooms, one for you and your wife, one for each kid, that gets expensive.
It's very expensive.
Yeah, so with an Airbnb, you can add an extra bed or living space, bedroom. Even in Paris, it's doable.
Yeah, and it was definitely, we had looked at the possibility of 2 hotel rooms.
Yeah.
And still, a very, very nice Airbnb was less expensive than a fairly moderate 2 hotel rooms.
Yeah. So I'll need you to send me the name of your Airbnb. I'll put it as a recommendation on the website. Of
Great.
course, this is Airbnb. So you listeners, when you want to book it, it might not be available. So, that's how it works. But you could try it. It might be available.
Absolutely. And the one that we stayed in was unreal. And balcony, big space.
Wonderful.
It was wonderful.
In Paris, that's unusual.
Yeah. We lucked out, no doubt about it.
Very good.
The sixth thing that I put on my list here was the use of the rental scooters, like Lime and Bird and Wind. Yeah. To do those with our 13-year-old proved to be a lifesaver. It's just an added dimension of fun, and he got a kick out of scooting up the block and scooting back and seeing how fast he could go here and there, and wanting to make sure that we chose roads that didn't have huge crowds, and that prevented, I think, a little bit of the complaining about the walking that, you walk 5, 6, 7 miles a day. Teenagers are going to get a little cranky about that, but not with a scooter.
So did everybody get a scooter or just him?
Nope. We just got it for him.
Okay.
The other 3 of us, we just walked and followed him, and he just explored ahead and came back and probably put double the miles on the scooter that we put on our feet. But it was wonderful.
Oh, that's good. So is it expensive or is it cheap? Or?
It was, I want to say it came in maybe around €10 an hour.
Okay.
And that, it's by no means is it dirt cheap, but it wasn't prohibitively expensive. Right. And the payoff of having a happy teenager all day long is huge. Mm-hmm. Cannot ever complain about that. Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize they were that expensive. I thought they were cheaper than that.
I could be wrong, but and there were some quirks when we decided to leave it someplace. How to stop the transaction proved to be confusing with a couple of the apps, and a couple of young guys helped us at one point and just said, close the app completely, and that will close the transaction, and that's exactly what worked. So they weren't necessarily your app easy. Closed. Yeah, but it worked out really well, and I would do that all the time. With him. It was great.
I've seen them in Paris. They are everywhere. It's unbelievable.
They're everywhere and maybe a little annoying sometimes. Yes. But I'll take that for the kids.
Yeah. I saw, I never saw anybody over 35 riding them.
Right.
Because I think it must take some balance, some definite, good balance to do these things. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't want to risk injury far from home.
Yeah. All right,
Kids,
very good.
They just bounce.
Yeah, that's true.
So number 7 on the list, my wife and I and the kids, I suppose we're foodies. And to me, eating in Paris is heavenly. And it doesn't even have to be all that complex. To me, running into a boulangerie in the morning and grabbing a couple things, including some of the sandwiches that they'll have early in the morning, and just throw that in a bag for an inexpensive lunch later. Yep. That's Paris can be expensive if you're going to sit down and have 3 meals a day. And I don't personally think there's need for that because the boulangeries are so great.
Right. You can find really good sandwiches.
Absolutely.
A sandwich plus a drink plus a pastry in Paris is how much? 10?
Yeah, I'd say about 10. Yeah. And if you're knocking out 2 meals for you for €10, that gives you money for really nice dinners.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we had many nice dinners, and I think we're blessed with having a couple teenagers that are not skittish about food. We had escargot and frog legs and lamb chops and mussels and foie gras, and we ate every pastry in sight. And to me, being in restaurants where we're willing to try things that are outside the comfort zone, I only find to be more endearing with Parisian servers. They know that we're there to explore.
Yeah, yeah, and they will usually make a big deal. Like I've seen servers explain. I was on a tour, and this gentleman on the tour said, "This is my first time eating escargot," and so the waitress very carefully showed him how to eat it, and make sure he didn't stain his shirt and all of that. It was very cute. I thought it was adorable.
Yeah, it's nice. It's good to explore a culture, and to me, the best way to explore it is with food. I'll send you the name of a place where we had an amazing meal. I got lamb brains, which I had in this particular restaurant before, and I really liked them. We all tried them, and I think, that sort of adventurousness, I know the server appreciated that.
I know my mother served us brains once, and she realized none of us ate it. My father, I think, ate it. But
yeah.
The rest of us were like, no, this does not go in my gullet.
It's not for everybody, but it's again, I
good
think
for you for trying it. I mean, why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with kids too, it's modeling that willingness to just try things. You don't necessarily have to like it, but trying things is my favorite way to travel.
That's great. Okay, yes, you'll have to send me that name because
yes, I will, absolutely.
I'm sure people will want to know.
So the next point is about the metro. I know sometimes people get a little skittish about using the metro, and they think that they need to go use Uber or taxis, and we use the metro the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
We either walked or we used the metro, and we taught the kids how to use the metro, and by the third or fourth day, they knew how the whole thing functioned, and they could read the maps, and they were phenomenal. And to me, giving kids the ability to navigate public transit in a big city is a gift they will use for the rest of their life.
Right. And back home, do you have a transit system?
No. We live in Santa Cruz, and there is a bus system there that the kids have used from time to time. But it's a town of only 100,000 people.
Right.
So public transit's not something, and I think outside of Chicago, New York, Americans generally don't use a lot of public transit. But in Europe, it's the way to go. We used the number 4 line very frequently, and it was incredibly crowded. And I think sometimes Americans kind of stand back and think, I can't get on that car because it's too crowded. And then they watch the Parisians just squeeze in. Yeah. And that's what you got to do. It's just part of the adventure. Just jump in there.
Otherwise, you might wait a good long time.
A very long time, right. Yeah. We did use the Next Stop Paris app from RATP, and it was really easy. Plug in where you want to go. It knows your location, so it can find the closest stop for you. And that proved nice for me to at least double check what the kids determined. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend that. And there are other apps out there that will help you do metro planning as well. But absolutely use the metro and don't be afraid of squeezing in. And then, my first time to Paris was in the early 80s as a teenager. And ever since, I've known Paris has a pickpocket problem. Yeah. And so you've got to be smart about where you carry things and what you carry with you. But I've got to say it's better now than it was 15 years ago. And this particular trip, I saw no real evidence of bad pickpocket problems, keeping eyes open and looking around. But I think there's to not scare kids, but to teach them something about some of the methods that pickpockets use, and just to be aware and careful gives them that sense of street smarts that kind of like using public transit. If you can be street smart, the whole world is open to you.
Right. And I think the biggest thing is not to take stuff that's irreplaceable or difficult to replace.
Right.
Even me, I go to Paris, I have one I usually carry 2 credit. I have 2 credit cards in my wallet every day. That's all I have, and I don't really need more. So I have one in my pocket, and I have some cash in my pocket, and my phone. I zip everything up, and if they take it, well, I can replace it. The phone would be hard, but the credit card and the cash, well, it's not that much. But I don't take my driver's license. I don't take anything else that is hard to replace.
Right. And similarly, outside the Eiffel Tower, of course, there's the guys selling all the Eiffel Tower trinkets. And then outside the Louvre, there were numerous guys trying to push museum tickets on us.
Oh, yeah.
And to me, like, that can at first be maybe a little intimidating, particularly to teenagers. And to me, just, a confident no and kind of waving them off, never felt harassed.
Right.
And I think, kind of like saying bonjour when you go into a restaurant, if you act like you know what you're doing, then you're not going to get pushed around.
Right. I want to add a little something about this. The reason recently the Louvre made it a new rule that you can't enter any specific wing of the Louvre more than twice. And that's because the scammers out that you saw outside, people would leave the museum at noon or whatever, and they would just throw away their tickets in the garbage can, right? And so they would pick them up and resell them. And they saw this going on enough times that they decided, okay, then we're just going to limit. Every time you enter into a new wing of the Louvre, you have to go through electronic thing. And now it limits you to 2. So never buy a ticket from one of those guys outside of the museum. They're bogus. They're not going to work.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. My next point, I'm not at all about fashion. However, my son and I, we kind of played a little game waiting around in the foyer of the Louvre under the pyramid, and pick out the American game. and we had never talked about this before, and he looked at me and laughed and said, "Oh, that'll be easy." And he looked around and he picked out a couple, and I said, "Well, what was it that made you notice that so fast? Because we haven't talked about this." He's like, "You can just tell. There's a baseball hat, and there's sneakers, and there's a backpack or a camelback on his back, and that's totally an American."
Yeah.
And again, through many visits in Paris, the more you can kind of blend in, whether it's muted colors or using quieter voices or just kind of being low maintenance in your ordering of food, all of those things just make your experience better. The louder you dress, the louder you dress, the louder you talk, the more attention you bring to yourself, the less, or maybe the more likely you're going to have a difficult experience.
Yeah. Although, by now sneakers are not a problem. Baseball caps, everybody wears sneakers in Paris. It's like, it wouldn't make you stand out at all. But the baseball caps, not as common, especially backwards, Don't do that.
Right.
The loud, bright shirts with... I've been known to wear them, but you don't do that in France,
Right.
Unless you want to.
And Paris is different.
Yes. And Paris is very different. It's different tooling around my village and going to Paris. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So along the lines of our foodiness, I suppose, I've also got to say, take the kids around a grocery store. We were right around the corner from a Monoprix, and just walking through there and seeing, a whole different set of flavors. We were buying Pringles and flavors that we can't get in the States, and finding different chocolates and different treats. And, it's a small thing, but again, if there's a willingness to wander through a grocery store, you just experience a culture in a different way.
Yeah.
And then if you've got the Airbnb, then you've got a place to bring that to, and you have a snack in the evening. And I know people go to some of the fancier markets, Bon Marché or those sorts of places.
Sure.
And that's great. I'm all for that. But just wandering into a neighborhood grocery store gives you a different way to experience a city and people.
Yeah. Most French people can't afford to buy groceries every day at Bon Marché or Galeries Lafayette. They have this gorgeous... Not very far from the Opera House, they have this gorgeous Galeries Lafayette food type of store. Oh, it's fantastic, but it's so expensive, I mean, you buy a few things in there for souvenirs or whatever, but not for every day.
Well, and we actually, or maybe me, bought many souvenirs in Monoprix because I'm a big fan of the Moncherie chocolates, which I know are Italian, but when I'm in Europe, I have to buy them, and Monoprix was well stocked until I came in.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah. The next thing, Americans tend to eat dinner a little earlier than Europeans.
Yeah.
And so, and the restaurants very often in Paris don't open until 7 or 7:30.
Yep.
And then if you go looking for the places that, people say you're supposed to eat, you're going to have to get a reservation. You don't have to eat in those places. But if you do, wandering in shortly after they open, we had no problem at all getting a seat. They asked if we had a reservation, and I could tell that was maybe a little point of contention. They were hoping that we did. Yeah. And when I said no, they shrugged and grabbed a few menus and brought us to a table and did so quite happily.
Yeah.
So, and the one time that I did make an online reservation, we showed up at the restaurant, and I don't think they actually got the relay by the internet because my name was nowhere in sight, and that wasn't a problem. We got a table.
Yeah, so that's the thing. You never know the places where you must get a reservation and the places where it doesn't matter. So places where it doesn't matter that much, I don't know that they even check the notifications that they get reservations. They know they're not going to be full anyway. So,
So, and the next point I wrote, while getting out of touristy areas is nice and important, for first-timers, the touristy areas will be friendly and helpful. And, I find sometimes people go to a place like Paris and they just want to, and I think they should, get out and see these neighborhoods and get away from where all the tourists are. And that's fine. But, for a first trip, there's nothing wrong with being in the touristy areas. You're going to get treated pretty well. And it's just a good way to get your feet wet.
Yeah.
And we walked a couple of, what I would call the foodie roads, Rue Montorgueil, Rue de Martz, coming down from Montmartre. Mm-hmm. And they were wonderful. And they didn't seem flooded with tourists. In fact, I was really surprised around Les Halles to find many Parisians. And
Les Halles is French people. Yeah.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
And so, getting out into some of the outer sections of Paris is great, but you're going to have a wonderful time exploring, the big sites.
Yeah, I didn't understand the street name you said. So Montorgueil, yes. The second one was what?
I know it's Rue of Martyrs, Rue de Martyrs.
Rue des Martyrs. Yes, Rue des Martyrs, of course, yes. Okay.
And that was beautiful. Those places,
yes.
The patisserie in there were beautiful. They were like museums in and of themselves.
Yes.
So, and many, I'm sorry, go ahead, Annie.
No.
Many people have asked since we got back what it was like with the protests.
Ah, yes.
And this was not an issue. And I felt before we left, having traveled in Europe a lot, these are big cities. It's not as though protests take over an entire city. And there's a different sense of protest, I guess. And I kind of kiddingly say, the French are going to protest, but it's going to be a scheduled time at a particular place. It's going to be well organized. And when they're done, they're going to move on and do their thing.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the way it turned out.
Right.
Now, that said, if you didn't know what you were getting into, there could be some weird times. We took the metro up to Arc de Triomphe on a Saturday, and we were going to walk from there down to the Eiffel Tower. And sure enough, this was a day when the protests were going to be right outside the Eiffel Tower after marching down the Champs-Élysées. And so the metro stops up the Champs-Élysées were all closed.
Right.
We got off on the other side of the Arc de Triomphe. There were police officers everywhere. And maybe if you're not accustomed to that, it's intimidating. We just kept our eyes open for what was going on, and we saw nothing. We went down to the Eiffel Tower, walked up, walked back down,
right.
And then we heard the protest right outside the Eiffel Tower.
Right.
And before that, we had seen many, many police officers very, very prepared for most anything, well armed, like military.
Yeah.
And, we just kept our eyes open, and the protests went on, and we listened and we watched from a distance. We walked through where the protest was a couple hours later, and there was lots of broken glass and graffiti.
Yeah.
And, to me, again, it's just teaching kids to be street smart and be aware of your surroundings. And when you see the density of police officers increase, then it's probably worth paying attention.
Yeah, exactly.
But it wasn't a problem at all.
Now, the thing with these Gilets jaunes, the reason why it got so big is that the first few weekends that they did this, the first few Saturdays, the authorities were caught off guard. And there were a lot of them. I mean, I think the first day there were like a couple 100,000 in Paris alone. Wow. And so that was big, and there was a lot of destruction, and it made the news all over the world. But in the meantime, it's been 15 Saturdays, 16 Saturdays, and now it's a very small crowd of them. I think last Saturday in Paris there was 800 of them, and probably a few thousand police officers.
That's the way it seems.
Yeah, so it's down to a trickle, but the trickle will continue. They are not going to stop, okay? Because these are very determined people, but they have a right to protest, and so we're going to put up with it. And it's unfortunate that it got off to such a negative start, because it was just really wrong at the beginning. Something was very wrong, and people thought, oh no, what's happening in France? And yeah, they got caught off guard. The authorities got caught off guard, and hopefully they won't do that again.
Yeah, they're not off guard anymore, I'll tell you. They were very, very well prepared. I suppose the next hint is more for adults, but I cannot recommend enough just being relaxed and getting a carafe of Bordeaux or whatever you want. Surfing around a long menu for picking out the right wine. I just find in Paris, it's just easy to just get a carafe of whatever you like, and it's inexpensive, and you've got plenty, and it's simple, and whatever wine most any restaurant is serving is going to be great.
That's right. The house wine thing, which is carafe de vin, is going to be fine. And most restaurants in Paris will have that, even some fairly uppity ones, because if they mostly serve French people, they know French people don't want to pay 50 euros for a bottle of wine. Right. Most of them don't anyway. And so they have something inexpensive, but it's always a fine wine. I mean, it's a good quality wine. It's not the best wine you've ever had, but it's good enough for a meal. It's no problem. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Americans often go to Paris and get perplexed by the restroom situation. And, when you go into a restaurant, there's a time, after you've had your meal, there's a time to take advantage of the free restroom if it's available. I find, honestly, traveling throughout Europe, that McDonald's, whether you get something to eat there or not, most of the time their restrooms are clean and acceptable for Americans. You're also going to see those free, I think they're free, the pods that have popped up on the streets in a lot of European cities, where the doors open and then after you leave, it's self-cleaning. The one piece of advice that I got to mention there, because I've seen a couple unfortunate mistakes. When that door opens and you exit, that's not a time to let somebody else in to use it real fast. You've got to let that door close and let it clean, and then you can go in.
That's actually pretty funny. The person, but it just won't clean.
For everyone but one.
Yeah, well, but it won't. It'll just interrupt the cleaning cycle. And so people say, oh, this was gross. But that's because you interrupted the cleaning cycle. It was supposed to, So, the person exits the bathroom, let the door close again. And when it reopens, it's all yours.
You're right. So the next thing, Americans have, I think, started to learn about our food markets and farmers markets, and that's great. But going through a farmers market or a food market on a Saturday morning in Paris is like nothing you've experienced. And you've just got to do it, and you've got to wander around and see the unique cuts of meat and the unique fish, and just see all the differences. And we had some nice conversations with merchants about what various things were. Everyone was really engaging. A surprising number of the merchants also spoke English. We did our best with French. I speak enough to do a lot of the basics, and yet they often responded, in English, and we just had really nice conversations and bought some delicious food. We didn't buy any meat or fish or anything. That would have been nice to bring back to the apartment and cook, but we definitely bought some little pastries and some fruit. And
That's cool.
There's nothing like walking around those markets.
And your teenagers enjoyed the food? Yeah, you said you said they were adventurous anyway.
Yeah, they will, if nothing else, they will try anything. And and we've been working with them for years. You know, it's just, we're in a family where that's what we do. We try different foods, and they're kind of used to that, and that's a real benefit. But we also talked up the fact that, going to Paris is like going nowhere else, and we're just going to try things and see how it goes. And they did that absolutely beautifully.
That's great. That's awesome that they went along with that, because some kids are a little bit trickier and it can be difficult, because in France, the restaurants very often they don't have that big of a menu. Like they have a few things on their menus, and that's what they have. They can't just whip up mac and cheese,
Right.
They don't make that. They don't have the ingredients. So, yeah.
And our son, I should mention, has a peanut allergy as well as a few other food allergies. And we were so pleasantly surprised by how accommodating and willing to check into food ingredients people were. It was wonderful. And we carried a little card that I had written up that said in French what his allergies were. And I think maybe we used that one time, but just he has an allergy to peanuts. If you just learn that phrase, people were wonderful.
Yeah.
We were even in one restaurant that had their menu coded for what ingredients, what allergens were in some of the foods.
Yeah, some of them do that now.
And it was wonderful.
Yeah. Some of them, we see that some places.
Yeah. So try with teenagers, try to restrict phone use to the end of the day.
Wow.
Now, I suppose our solution to that was we only added an international plan to one of our 4 phones. So only one was going to be useful during the day anyway. And that was my wife's phone. And then they were able to use their phones in the evening. You take a picture, you want to post it to Instagram. That's something that we do back at the apartment.
Yeah.
And with the way kids are tied to phones now, you'll be amazed by how much more engaging and fun kids can be when the phone gets put away.
That is wonderful. Yeah. I found the same thing with young children. When I was there with my sister-in-law, her kids were much younger than yours, and they just didn't have the devices with them. Right. And they were happy-go-lucky most of the day. And then by the end of the day, we'd go back to the hotel, and they could, be glued to their iPads. But that's fine. They had spent lots of hours exploring Paris, so it was great.
Yeah, that works. My final point, I guess, is to explore local flavor for souvenirs. The little tin Eiffel Tower was probably made somewhere else, and might be very inexpensive and might be the souvenir you want, but there's so many other wonderful things. The green boxes along the Seine, maybe there's a book that's going to evoke the trip for you. We wandered through Shakespeare and Company, the bookstore. And that was wonderful. And that was also a nice little I guess, return to English for a little bit. We also walked through the Little Prince store. I can't remember. It was between the Seine and maybe it was Saint-Germain-des-Prés, somewhere in there.
It could be.
And it's a wonderful little store if your kids enjoy The Little Prince. My daughter thinks it's the greatest book and the greatest movie she's ever seen. And so wandering through there was fun. And that was just serendipity. We had no intention of going in there, but we found it. Candies and snacks. We actually bought, I think pretty much everybody got souvenirs that came from a grocery store. So, exploring something local, a little piece of art,
Yeah.
That's so much better than something that was probably made in China and you can buy for €3. So you might spend a little more, but you get something more authentic.
Yeah. I've enjoyed taking souvenirs from grocery stores. People I take them to like them. Now, sometimes you have to be a little careful because if you don't have a checked bag, then like jams you can't take and, wine and stuff like that is, well, unless you buy it at the airport, which you could, I suppose.
Right.
But
you do have to be careful.
Right. You have to be careful that it's not something you have to check in. Like mustard, for example. Well, it'll get confiscated if it's not checked. So, so be careful of that. But it's a wonderful way to take, local gifts. And they're not that expensive, really. I mean... So it's the thought that counts. And if you can bring somebody a nice jar of mustard from Paris, I think they'll like it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's our list. We had a wonderful time. The kids got a great introduction to urban travel. They got a great introduction to Paris. And I know they'll go back, and I think we gave them the tools to do it on their terms.
Yeah. Is there anything that didn't work out at all that they didn't like or that you just left because it was no good?
There was nothing that we left because it was no good. There were some things that maybe by the end of the week they were just exhausted. Mm-hmm. Wandering through the Orangerie was nice at that point because really most people are in there to see the Monet lilies and that's it. There's 2 rooms and you're done. Going downstairs.
There's one downstairs, right?
Right. Going downstairs was nice, but sometimes art museums, if you don't either have an interest in art or you don't already know the works of art you're going to see, the art museums are not terribly exciting. Musée Rodin. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think with teenagers, one way to do it is to do a little research about what the collection is in that museum and maybe pick 1 or 2 pieces that you want them to see because they're classic or because, and then you talk about it a little bit before the trip and then you remind them, oh, yeah, this is the museum where I told you about this piece. Let's go see if we can find it.
Exactly.
And then you can go kind of fast, but they're kind of hunting around for that piece. And that works even with very young kids. I mean, even a 5-6-year-old, if you show them a picture of a photo of a painting and you say, okay, we're looking for this painting because it was made by this guy who chopped his ear off or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Exactly.
and then they want to find it. And it makes it easier for teenagers. You don't have to be quite that simplistic, but it works as well.
Well, and knowing a little bit about the art so that you can share that with the kids. For me as a history teacher, of course, going through some of these art museums, I've got lots of stories, but you still have to limit. I every now and then I read about people going to the Louvre and they're there for 7 or 8 hours and that must be torture for teenagers. We were there for maybe 3 hours.
Yeah.
We hit a couple of the highlights. My son wanted to go see the Egyptian section, so we made sure to go do that.
Yeah.
He actually taught us about a lot of the things we were seeing.
There you go.
That was huge. And again, we got enough of a flavor of it that now they can go back and do things on their terms.
Right. One thing I've seen that works well with kids is especially in the Egyptian section, there's some of the Egyptian gods that you're going to see over and over again. And so if you ask them to look for that god, let's see if we can find another one, that can help too.
Yeah. And there are businesses I've seen online that will organize scavenger hunts with kids.
Treasure hunt in the Louvre is fantastic.
Exactly.
Yes, it's very good.
Yeah, they look great. They're not terribly cheap.
No, they're $25 per person, I think.
Right. And my expertise, maybe I shouldn't call it expertise, but my knowledge of the Louvre, and I've been there many times, and my knowledge of the art allowed me to do a lot of that, and tell some funny stories. And that, so we didn't feel a need to do those, but I can absolutely see where those would be absolutely valuable walking through there with kids. Yeah,
and the kids are totally enthralled because they're into it because they're playing against other kids. So they're running around and really booking it. It's kind of cute.
Absolutely. So we had a wonderful time and I can't wait to go back. And I know the kids learned enough there that they're ready to travel there and elsewhere.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. You've shared some really good tips, and I'm sure you've inspired people to follow in your footsteps.
Great.
And
would love that.
Take their kids to Paris because, I know I'm going to sound like an old lady, but they grow up fast.
They do.
Mine just turned 21, and I'm like, oh, where has the time gone? But she still does things with us, so that's good.
That is good.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
All right. Thank you, Annie.
Merci. Au revoir.
Merci. Au revoir.
Au revoir. I have nobody new to thank for pledging to Patreon or sending in a donation this week. Thankfully, that's not a really usual occurrence. But if you've been thinking that you love this podcast and that you would like to support it, visit patreon.com/join us to see all the reward tiers. And it's the end of the month. Rewards coming your way very soon, patrons. Or if you'd rather, you can go to any page on joinusinfrance.com and look for the green button that says Tip Your Guide. And then you can send in a one-time donation, and your support is very much appreciated. For my personal update this week, well, my Labradoodle Opie is getting spayed as we speak. I'm a little nervous about that. But hey, it'll be better for her long-term health, and I definitely don't want her making puppies. I may have to share a photo of her with the blow-up thingy around her neck, the new thing people use to prevent her, from licking her wound. She's gonna be mad at me, I know it. The weather has been wonderful last week. It now looks like we're in for 5 days of rain coming up. And I'm talking about Toulouse, of course. The weatherman calls for actually better weather in Paris than in Toulouse for the next few days. And that doesn't make any sense. But it's happening, it looks like. Overall, it's been a wet month of May. So if you're coming to France soon, bring a raincoat and maybe a couple of layers, because you never know about the weather, folks. French people are heading to the polls on Sunday, today, if you're listening on the day this comes out, for the European Parliament election. And French people really don't take that election very seriously. And the turnout is generally quite a bit lower than at other elections. I'll be voting because I never miss an election. And since I have both French and American citizenship, I vote in 2 countries. The predictions are that, as always, people will be using this European vote to signal their grumpiness about whichever French politician they love to hate, rather than vote in favor of a specific person they think will do a good job on the European scale. So the French press keeps repeating that even though Macron is not on the ballot, this is really all about him. Really? I mean, I don't know. I vote, but sometimes these things are beyond me. And speaking of French politics, as we mentioned in my conversation with Mark, the Gilets jaunes movement is really moribund. At this point, there are a dozen gatherings in the whole country. They attract a few hundred people each. It's no big deal at all. But the police have to be ready for anything because some of these gatherings were small but violent. So you will continue to see lots of police out on Saturdays. That doesn't mean that the yellow fever won't come back in full force at some point. This is France. We love a good protest, I guess. But for now, don't worry, be happy. As you know, because you're listening to me right now, you can Join Us in France anywhere you get your podcasts. I love it if you help other people find out about the podcast. Word of mouth is the best advertising there is. If you want to see all the back episodes of the show, and if you wonder that if we've talked about a place you're thinking of visiting, visit joinusinfrance.com and either use the navigation bar or do a search. It works really great. Send questions or feedback to Annie at joinusinfrance.com. And I wish you a great week of trip planning, and I will talk to you next Sunday. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.